The valley held its breath like a thing waiting for a verdict. Copper light slanted across scrub and stone, stretching the shadows of distant ridgelines into black knives. Sergeant Marcus Hale lay flat and still on a heat-warped dune, his rifle an extension of a body that had long ago learned to vanish into landscape. He had always accepted that fame, if it ever came, would be a photograph, a single frozen frame of a face, a rifle, a moment people could point to and call heroism. He had also learned the truth the hard way, that the photograph is a lie of omission. A few inches behind him, barely more than a whisper away, Corporal Elena Reyes adjusted the dial on her spotting scope. Reyes was small-boned and precise, a woman who spoke in numbers and saw wind like a second language. She had watched Hale work for years. She could tell when his breath hit the frequency that meant his aim would hold. Tonight, she was the architect. Her face, lit by the green cast of an illuminated reticle, was an altar of calculation, range, temperature, barometric pressure. She read the valley the way other people read the morning paper. Wind 3.8 at 6 degrees, mirage shifting left, she murmured, more to herself than to him, the way a composer hears the next bar before he plays it. Her kestrel whirred softly next to her, an unglamorous device that carried the authority of a priest. It delivered microdata in numbers, humidity, crosswind components, tail pressures. These were the invisible gods that governed whether a bullet would fly true. Somewhere on the far ridge, an overwatch element leaned behind rocks the size of tombstones, eyes on angles Hale could not see. Their role was simple and absolute: keep the pair intact long enough for the shot to be made and for the team to vanish afterward. They overlapped lines of fire, each man and woman a pixel in a greater image of security. If something moved where it shouldn't, they would become the violent punctuation mark to the operation, and each of them knew that punctuation could be life or obituary. Hale's finger hovered on the trigger like an oar, waiting for the command. He had fired in conditions stranger and meaner than this: wind that spun bullets like gossip, mirage that played tricks on depth perception, rains that turned sand into slurry. But this job was different. The stakes felt heavier because a miscalculation didn't merely change a mission's success metrics. It could leap from one life ledger to another and rewrite entire families' futures. Reyes spoke the final adjustments with the calm efficiency of someone who has rehearsed catastrophe into predictability. Hold 2 breaths. Right point 4. Her voice was not theatrical. It achieved drama by being ordinary. Hale exhaled. The world disciplined itself into a single filament of time. He saw, not with eyes alone, but with muscle memory and the deep arithmetic of a man who had slept with danger and woken to find it unchanged. "Clear hot," came a voice from the security team, 3 syllables that were both a report and an invocation. The comms line hummed with encrypted life. No one back home would read the logs. No one would see the choreography. There were no cameras on the ridge, no thrill-seeking spectators to cheer the precision. The valley would remember only silence. Then, somewhere out beyond human hearing, a figure moved. A high-value target. The assignment as short as the order that produced it, as temporary as a photograph. The crosshairs crawled along a spine of light. Hale felt the rifle settle into a certainty that had taken years of practice to resemble. He did not think about medals or obituary columns. He thought about the team. Reyes's numbers, the Overwatch's blind faith, the comms tech's steady hand, the extraction vehicle idling like a promise. When Reyes gave the final nod, she did so for more than the riflemen. She nodded for the invisible architecture beneath them, the weather station that had not lied, the thermal optics that had found the target's shadow, the security element who would stake his life on a quiet decision. In that nod was the story no headline would print, that a single shot is a product of many hands, many devices, and an economy of trust. Hale squeezed the trigger. The valley answered in silence, and for a second the world was reduced to the thin music of a projectile stretching to its appointed place. Then came the small sound of impact, and almost immediately, a new urgency. Extraction windows closing, movement on the far approaches, the machine of exit beginning its careful turning. They had the shot. The harder part, getting home, had yet to begin. Corporal Elena Reyes had been taught to trust instruments before she trusted stories. Growing up on the edge of a city that had more sirens than stars, she had learned early to parse noise into signal. The kestrel she carried was little more than a pocket-sized oracle, and she treated its readings like scripture: temperature, humidity, wind at different strata. Where others saw weather as a backdrop, Reyes saw it as an actor with motives. She brought that discipline to the valley tonight, where data was less a convenience than a lifeline. Behind her scope, she translated minutiae into decisions: how much to dial for deflection, where mirage would bend the sightline, how a sun tilt would refract against a far ridge. Each variable was a decimal point that could tip the mission's balance. Ballistics was precise enough to be cruel. A single misplaced decimal could mean tragedy. Reyes kept a small waterproof notebook, a superstitious artifact in the age of electronic readouts, where she logged her readings in shorthand. It was a ritual, not because paper was superior, but because ritual steadied hand and mind. She wrote down the numbers, and then, as if exercising doubt, she spoke them aloud. Range 2,980, temp drop point 2, baro 932. The spoken sequence anchored the team like a litany. The technological layer to their operation was not glamorous. The thermal optics were clumsy, the weather station sat on a tripod like an indifferent sentinel, and the encrypted comms box had a utilitarian smell of plastic and sweat. Still, these devices amplified human perception. They made visible what naked eyes could not see: the bleached heat of a sleeping engine, the dark seam of a concealed and placed shooter, the way a shadow shifted as a man turned his head. From her scope, Reyes watched not just the target, but the surrounding negative space, the valley's empty margins where threats hide. That was the spotter's true gift, to see the whole chessboard. She tracked a glint on a distant ridge and, with practiced indifference, fed the observation back into the network. A voice acknowledged it. The Overwatch element changed posture. Invisible cogs synchronized. The data flowed both ways. Back at a forward operations node, a comms tech cross-checked satellite feeds and drone telemetry, then piped the relevant vectors down the line. The team received updates not as a cascade but as a managed stream, precise, prioritized, and surgical. Reyes appreciated that order. It kept panic from blooming. Panic was a contagion that few technical devices could inoculate against. At one point, a thermal fluctuation puzzled her. A heat signature that didn't match the expected profile. It might have been a pack with a chem heat reaction, or simply a sunlit rock. She fed the anomaly into the team loop. A secondary sweep confirmed the outlier as a mechanical heat source, a parked vehicle hidden by brush, and the Overwatch adjusted angles. That small confirmation prevented a later surprise that could have cost them dearly. The beauty, if beauty could be applied to such a utilitarian theater, lay in how human judgment and cold instruments braided together. The kestrel doesn't interpret, Reyes does. The thermal camera doesn't decide, the Overwatch interprets. They owned different competencies, and together they produced a competence that no single person could achieve. It was teamwork crystallized into function. Reyes never wanted the photograph. She did not crave the spotlight that would strip nuance from the operation and turn her into a caption. She wanted precision. She wanted the satisfaction of numbers aligning and a team performing its quiet miracle. Tonight, those numbers moved like a clock toward a single event, the shot. But even as the digits ticked, television-ready drama felt irrelevant. In the end, the mission's poetry would be private, a notebook line, a dial turned, a whisper into a headset. When she passed the final correction to Hale, her voice was firm because she had done the math of probability and human error. That tiny act, giving the last decimal, was the fulcrum of the entire enterprise. It was also implicitly a vow that she would do whatever the instruments and her judgment demanded to return the man behind the rifle to whatever small human life waited for him beyond the valley. The whisper on the comms arrived as a prioritized blip, soft and insistent, possible counter-sniper on East Ridge. For a breath, the valley's geometry shifted. Where a plan had once been linear, it became a branching set of contingencies. The Overwatch tightened. Hale's pulse checked its cadence against muscle memory. Reyes's head snapped to the east reticle, eyes scanning the ridgeline for any anomaly that would betray another shooter's presence. Countersnipers were a specialized curse. They used the same artifice, the same patience and calibration to hunt the hunters. A solitary glint could mean a rifle barrel under a ghillie suit. A misplaced heat signature could hide inside a vehicle's engine bay. The room for error evaporated like morning fog. Protocols that existed as comfortable rehearsal now demanded immediate application. "Glass," Reyes said, not loud enough to be theatrical, but loud enough to redirect three people's attention. The Overwatch element swept into a new posture, shifting fields of observation to cover the east sector. The security team, spread across concealed positions, readied to interdict any incoming antagonist. Their response was not improvisation. It was choreography born of repetition. For Hale, the moment was surreal. His immediate instinct was to find the countersniper with his own optics and neutralize the threat. But that was vanity. He knew his role, one shot, precise and final. The safety of the pair had to be addressed by the network, by those who had the angles he lacked. He trusted them because he had no other choice. A thin crack of gunfire split the valley like a punctuation. It was not random. It was aimed and measured, an attempt to shape the environment into chaos. The Overwatch returned fire with disciplined bursts, voices reporting hits and denies. In the distance, a figure flinched, then stopped moving. An engaged countersniper was a dangerous enemy neutralized only by equal professionalism. Even as the firefight unfolded, communications remained tight. The extraction team recalibrated their ingress routes. A secondary Overwatch element took up concealment to guard the egress. Every soldier did precisely what training and habit demanded, because improvisation in such moments was a luxury they could not afford. Reyes kept speaking the variables. Her voice never betrayed adrenaline. It stayed in the realm of data. Counter at 202 degrees, suppression effective, reorienting target azimuth to compensate for displacement. Her mouth formed numbers like a surgeon's scalpel. Hale adjusted his aim to account for the micro-movements in the air that came from near-miss rounds. The shot he had planned to take in one geometry now required micro-corrections for the new dynamics. A lull arrived, temporary and brittle. The countersniper had been suppressed but not fully neutralized, enough to concede the valley to them, but not enough to guarantee a walkaway. The team used the pause to breathe methodically and to reassert control. They were not glorified warriors on a stage. They were technicians of survival, trading time and data for a sliver of advantage. In those minutes, a subtle cultural truth exposed itself. Bravery was not the loud roar of a single hero, but the quiet competence of many people doing small, essential tasks under pressure. The security element had not sought the spotlight. They had slotted into position and taken risk without drama. Reyes had not thundered orders. She had been the steady metronome. Hale had not sought glory. He had been the final instrument of a much larger mechanism. When the ridge fell silent again, it was not victory in the public sense. It was a functional reset. Threats identified, addressed, and contained. The mission continued, scarred but intact. Each of them understood that the most dangerous part of their job persisted, not the shot, but the exit. They had won a round in a quiet war. They still had to return home. They call it extraction because it sounds clinical. The truth is that extraction is an art form that marries timing, deception, and velocity. After the shot, the valley's map changed. Routes once safe might be compromised, and the team had to move like a single, compact organism. Engines warmed at a distant staging area, their sound a promise and a threat, the promise of safety, the threat of detection. Hale and Reyes moved with a calm that belied their adrenaline. Every movement had been rehearsed in darker, colder places. The security element peeled away to provide covering fire and to mask their egress. Overhead, a discreet drone traced a reconnaissance arc, transmitting live telemetry to a node that could see gaps and opportunities the ground teams could not. Extraction planning begins before the shot. Multiple routes, decoy vectors, timed distractions. Tonight, it meant a serpentine exit through canyons known only to a few maps and to a handful of warriors who had walked them at dead hours. The extraction driver, an operator whose face none of them would see in the public narrative, kept his vehicle's engine at a precise idle, a machine trained to start and move in a single breath when called upon. Reyes ran through the checklist: comms check, med kit, radio frequency confirmation, suppressive fire windows. Each item ticked off the list was a small ceremony that ensured the larger one would not fail. The team acknowledged each other in glances rather than words. They were a practiced company of non-theatrical rituals. As they moved, the terrain punished mistakes. Loose rock shifted under boots, scrub clutched at pant legs. The exit route required them to navigate a narrow defile that funneled them into a pre-scoped pickup zone. The security element laid down a perimeter and then fell back along a predetermined arc, shielding the egress with their bodies if need be. Unexpectedly, an old watchtower, a relic from past conflicts, loomed into view, offering a line of sight that could jeopardize the extraction. Reyes recalculated on the move, feeding a new bearing to the team lead. The driver adjusted, the pickup point slid 7 meters down the canyon, and the choreography adapted. No one panicked. They had done this too often to invent panic now. Once the vehicle appeared, headlights swallowed the canyon's shadows. The team moved with fluid urgency. Hale, who had been the singular image to be frozen in photographs, now became but one node in the exiting organism. He felt the gravity of each hand that helped him into the vehicle, not as a burden, but as an inheritance. Each team member was a line in a story that would be compressed into a single caption somewhere else. Inside the vehicle, the team kept positions as much for security as for medical readiness. Every face remained alert. The driver threaded the canyon with a confidence that comes from knowing not only the terrain, but also how long it takes for search patterns to converge. The extraction was not a sprint. It was a timed performance where speed had to be measured against stealth. When they finally cleared the ridge and the valley silhouette receded, a collective exhale moved through the vehicle like a tide. It was not celebration. It was acknowledgement, mission accomplished, but the ledger was never fully balanced. There would be debriefs, the quiet accounting of mistakes and near misses, and the slow, private reckoning of what had been exchanged for their success. Extraction is a plural noun. It speaks to the many who made the exit possible. The public might see a single photograph, a single name, and a headline. The truth is a longer sentence, a list of people, instruments, and decisions sewn together to produce a living return. They would go home imperfect, measured by fatigue and adrenaline, and tomorrow they would begin the slow work of being human again. In the weeks after the operation, the world folded the story into convenient fragments. A brief press release, a terse medal ceremony photo, a headline that reduced months of preparation to a single line. "Sniper neutralizes high-value target," the banners read, a tidy sentence that swallowed context. Back at base, the team sat in a dim room for a long debrief. The conversation was surgical, cruelly honest, and devoid of spectacle. They reviewed logs, not to manufacture heroism, but to learn where math had come close to failing. Reyes highlighted an atmospheric anomaly recorded in her notebook, a small fluctuation in barometric pressure that had not been in the original model. It had not cost them the mission, but it became a lesson to be hardened into procedure. Hale kept his vigil in quieter ways. He declined interviews, not out of false modesty, but because words had a habit of excising the people in between. The photograph that circulated contained only a silhouette and a rifle. It didn't tell of the hands that had tuned the sight, or the overwatch that had interposed itself between them and death, or the extraction driver who had waited like a guardian angel. The team shared the small comforts of survivors, a round of coffee in a sunlit mess, a short, loud joke that relieved pressure for a second, a nod across a table that meant more than thanks. They cataloged their mistakes and their lucky margins so they could close those gaps next time. There was no hero worship, only a tacit understanding that survival depended on humility and vigilance. At night, long after the cameras had moved on to fresher narratives, Reyes would sometimes pull out her waterproof notebook and rewrite the numbers. In the margins, she wrote small notes to herself about drills and calibration. The notebook was both a map and a talisman. Hale kept a small token in his kit, A scrap of fabric from a uniform sewn into a pocket, a private reminder that even the best shot bullet had a margin of dependence. The public's appetite for tidy narratives is understandable. Simpler stories are easier to digest than the messy truth. But for those who operate in the margins, the truth is a lived reality. Every successful shot is the product of instruments, people, decisions, and the quiet courage to trust someone else with your survival. When the team dispersed, they returned to routines that looked ordinary but were underpinned by uncommon knowledge. Hale taught marksmanship to recruits, translating microphysics into muscle memory. Reyes ran calibration sessions and lectured on environmental reading. The Overwatch crew practiced vector sweeps in simulated ridgelines. They all carried memories that did not fit headlines. Small failures they corrected, small successes they archived. If the public wanted a hero, the team was content to provide a record of competence. They preferred the truth, that no one person acts alone, and that heroism, when it happens, is often the end result of coordinated work by people who will never be named in a caption. They were not seeking praise. They wanted to get better. They wanted to survive. In the end, the valley kept its silence and the photograph kept its lie. But somewhere between the instrument readings and the extraction logs, the real story persisted, resilient against compression. It belonged to people who accepted that courage is often logistical, that bravery often looks like discipline, and that the greatest victories are sometimes invisible to the world that demands to be told about them.